Was it a dream? I don't know for certain if it really happened. Sometimes I think it was only a dream, the kind that feels too vivid, too detailed, too complete to belong entirely to sleep. And yet, there are moments when it returns with such clarity that I cannot dismiss it so easily. Years have passed. I am no longer a child. Life has moved forward in the way it always does, quietly, steadily, without asking whether we are ready. But every winter, especially when the air grows cold and the nights stretch longer, the memory comes back. Not all at once, not like a story being told. It arrives in fragments, a sound, a color, the feeling of warmth against cold skin, the slow rhythm of something moving through the darkness. I remember being older, already in university, standing on a train platform late at night, waiting for a train that was delayed. The station lights flickered softly above me, and for a brief moment, I felt the same sensation I had felt years before. That quiet pull, that sense of being somewhere between places. Later, in adulthood, letters would arrive without a return address. Blank envelopes, empty inside, yet carrying a strange familiarity. I never understood why I kept them. I only knew I could not throw them away. And always behind these moments, there was the image of a train. Not a modern one, not fast, but old, warm, and patient. When I think back now, it always begins the same way. With a night, with a child, with the decision to run. I was somewhere between 10 and 12 years old enough to feel misunderstood, young enough to believe that the world could still change suddenly, if only I walked far enough. That night, I remember feeling overwhelmed by something I could not explain. It wasn't anger alone. It wasn't sadness. It was the heavy, uncomfortable sense that I didn't belong where I was, at least not in that moment. The house felt too small, the walls too close. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. I don't remember exactly what was said, only the feeling that followed, a tightness in my chest, the kind that makes breathing feel shallow and urgent at the same time. So I did the only thing that made sense to me then. I left. The door closed behind me quietly. I didn't slam it. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just wanted distance, space, air. Outside, the world was different. Snow covered the streets in a soft, uneven layer, muting every sound. Street lights glowed through the falling flakes, turning the night into a slow-moving dream. My breath formed small clouds in front of me as I walked, my hands tucked deep into my pockets. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. I wandered through familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Houses stood silently, their windows dark or glowing faintly with warm light inside. Somewhere, far away, a church bell rang softly, marking an hour I wasn't paying attention to. The longer I walked, the quieter everything became. Eventually, the streets widened. Buildings thinned out. The air seemed heavier, damp with fog that crept in low and slow, wrapping itself around everything. That was when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought I was mistaken. There was no reason for me to be there. I had never planned to go that way. And yet, through the mist, I saw them. Long rows of dim, steady lights stretching into the distance. A train station. I stopped walking. I don't remember deciding to go closer. I only remember standing there one moment and the next, finding myself near the edge of the platform. The station was nearly empty. No announcements echoed through the air. No hurried footsteps, just the quiet hum of electricity and the distant sound of wind. The fog thickened. Then from somewhere beyond it came a sound, low, steady, rhythmic. At first it was barely noticeable, a vibration more than a noise, but slowly it grew clearer, the sound of metal against metal, wheels moving along rails. A train was approaching. I remember feeling something unexpected then. Not fear, warmth. The headlights emerged from the fog, casting long beams of light across the platform. The train moved slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. Its exterior looked old, almost timeless, dark metal reflecting the station light softly. As it came to a stop, the doors opened with a gentle hiss. Warm air spilled out. Light, soft voices somewhere inside. The faint scent of something comforting. Wood, fabric, maybe even something sweet. I stepped closer, without thinking. Inside, the train looked nothing like I expected. The seats were upholstered in deep, muted colors. Lamps cast a golden glow, and the windows showed nothing but drifting snow and darkness beyond. It felt safe, as if the train had been waiting. And before I could question myself, before doubt had a chance to catch up, I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me, and the train began to move. At first, nothing happened. The train moved, but so gently that I barely felt it. There was no sudden jolt, no sharp sound. Just a slow, steady glide, like drifting across still water. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The warmth inside the carriage wrapped around me almost immediately. My fingers, stiff from the cold, slowly began to relax. The tension I had been carrying with me from the house, from the streets, from the night, softened. I became aware of the sound, the quiet rhythm of the train on the tracks. Soft, repetitive, comforting. I had heard trains before, of course, but this sound was different. It wasn't loud or metallic. It felt muted, as if padded by layers of fabric and time. I looked around. The carriage was long, stretching farther than I could see at first glance. The ceiling curved gently overhead, and the walls were lined with dark wood panels, polished, smooth. Small lamps were mounted at regular intervals, their light warm and steady, never flickering. There were other passengers, not many, just enough to make the space feel occupied, but not crowded. They sat quietly in their seats, some looking out the windows, others gazing down at their hands or reading thin, unmarked books. No one spoke. No one seemed surprised to see me. I took a few slow steps forward, my shoes barely making a sound against the carpeted floor. The air inside smelled faintly of something familiar, maybe old paper, maybe wool coats, maybe the lingering trace of something sweet and seasonal, like cinnamon or pine. I passed one row of seats, then another. As I walked, I noticed something strange. There were no signs, no numbers above the seats, no destination boards, no maps. And yet everything felt deliberate, carefully arranged, as if nothing was missing. I stopped near one of the windows. Outside, the station had already vanished into the fog. The train seemed to be moving through darkness now, but not the empty kind. Shapes passed slowly beyond the glass. Trees, lights, structures I couldn't quite identify. Everything blurred gently, as if the world itself were half asleep. I remember wondering then whether anyone knew I was here, whether my parents had noticed I was gone, whether time outside the train was moving the same way it was inside. The thought didn't frighten me. It felt distant, like something that belonged to another version of me. A conductor passed by. I hadn't noticed him approach. He was simply there one moment, walking slowly down the aisle. He wore a dark uniform neatly pressed, and his movements were unhurried. His shoes made no sound on the floor. He didn't look at me, not directly. As he passed, I caught a glimpse of his face, calm, composed, ageless in a way I couldn't explain. He carried no clipboard, no lantern, no ticket puncher, just his hands, folded loosely in front of him. When he reached the far end of the carriage, he paused briefly, then turned and disappeared through a door I hadn't noticed before. That was when I saw them. The doors. They were spaced evenly along the length of the carriage, each one set into the wall between sections of seats. At first glance, they looked identical. Dark wood, simple brass handles, no markings. But the longer I looked, the more differences I noticed. One door seemed slightly warmer in color. Another looked older, its surface worn smooth, as if touched many times. One appeared almost new, its handle polished to a faint shine. I felt a pull toward them, not a strong one, not a force, more like curiosity, the kind that feels natural, inevitable. I approached the nearest door slowly. There was no sign above it, no label, no instruction. I raised my hand, hesitating just inches from the handle. Before I could touch it, a soft voice spoke behind me. Not that one. I turned. The conductor stood a few steps away, his expression calm, almost kind. His eyes met mine briefly, and for a moment I felt as though he knew far more about me than I knew about myself. "Why?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Not yet." I lowered my hand. He gestured gently down the carriage. "You'll know which door is yours." "How?" I asked. The conductor's smile didn't change. "You already do." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure gradually blending into the warm light of the lamps. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the train. The rhythm of the wheels seemed louder now, or maybe I was simply paying closer attention. As I walked farther down the carriage, I noticed the passengers more clearly. A woman staring out the window, her reflection overlapping with the dark shapes outside. An older man holding a ticket in his hand, though I hadn't seen where it came from. A child younger than me, sitting quietly, feet not quite reaching the floor. None of them looked frightened. Some looked thoughtful, some looked tired, some looked peaceful. The train continued on, and slowly I began to understand something, not with words, but with feeling. This train wasn't taking people somewhere specific. It was taking them where they needed to go. I stopped in front of another door. This one felt different. I can't explain how I knew. There was nothing unusual about its appearance. And yet, standing before it, I felt a quiet recognition, like remembering something I had forgotten on purpose. My hand moved on its own. I wrapped my fingers around the handle. The train continued its steady motion as I slowly began to turn it. The handle was warm. That was the first thing I noticed. Not warm like something heated by a fire, but warm in the way hands feel after being held for a long time. Familiar, reassuring, as if it had been waiting for me. I paused. For a moment, I listened to the train again. The steady rhythm of the wheels, the soft hum beneath everything else. It felt closer now, almost as if the sound was inside me rather than around me. I wondered what would happen if I opened the door. I wondered if I could still turn back, but even that thought felt distant, unimportant. There was no pressure, no urgency. The door did not demand anything from me. Slowly, I turned the handle. The door opened without a sound. Light spilled out, not bright, not blinding, just soft, golden light, like the glow from a living room late on a winter evening. Warm air followed, carrying with it a scent I recognized instantly, pine, baked sweets, cold air lingering near an open door. I stepped forward. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the sound of the train faded, not suddenly, but gently, as if someone were lowering the volume on a distant radio. And then I was no longer inside the carriage. I stood in a small town square, covered in snow. It was unmistakably winter. Snow rested on rooftops, on the branches of trees, on the edges of benches and lampposts. Strings of soft yellow lights hung between buildings, glowing quietly against the dark sky. I knew this place, not exactly as it was, but as it felt. This was a memory, not a single moment, but many moments woven together. I was younger here, not just in age, but in the way the world felt larger, fuller, untouched by explanations. I could feel it in my body, the lightness in my chest, the way my breath came easily, the absence of weight I didn't yet know how to name. People moved slowly through the square, families wrapped in scarves, couples walking close together, a group of children laughing softly as they chased one another around a snow-covered tree. I recognized none of their faces, and yet I recognized the feeling completely. This was what winter had felt like before it became complicated, before expectations, before disappointments, before time began moving faster than I could follow. I walked forward, my boots leaving faint impressions in the snow. The air was cold, but it didn't bother me. Every breath felt clean, sharp, in a pleasant way. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang. I turned and saw a small shop at the edge of the square. Its windows glowed warmly, and inside I could see shelves lined with simple things, books, ornaments, jars filled with something dark and glossy. I remember standing outside a place like this once. Not this exact shop, not this exact square, but a moment like it. A moment when I had felt safe, seen, content, without knowing why. I stepped closer to the window. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, layered over the warm interior. For a brief moment, I saw myself as I had been then, smaller, quieter, eyes wide with curiosity. Then the reflection shifted. For just an instant, I thought I saw myself older, taller, different. I blinked, and it was gone. A soft laugh drifted through the air. I turned. Near the center of the square stood a large evergreen tree, decorated simply, no elaborate ornaments, no bright colors, just lights, soft and steady. Beneath it, a few wrapped boxes rested quietly in the snow. I felt drawn to the tree. As I approached, the sounds of the square softened. Conversations faded into a gentle murmur. Footsteps became distant. It felt as though the world was slowly narrowing, focusing on this one place. I stopped a few steps away. There was a sense of pause here, as if the memory itself were waiting for me to notice something. I looked down. One of the boxes beneath the tree was slightly apart from the others. It wasn't larger or brighter, but something about it felt familiar. I knelt. The snow was cool against my gloves as I brushed it away. The wrapping was simple, plain paper tied with a thin piece of twine. No name, no tag. I hesitated. A strange thought crossed my mind then. I don't remember receiving this, but I remember holding it. Slowly, carefully, I lifted the box. It was lighter than I expected. As I held it, the square around me began to blur softly at the edges. Lights stretched slightly. Sounds faded further. The cold air felt distant. I looked up, suddenly unsure. That was when I heard the train again. Faint at first, then clearer. The rhythmic sound of wheels on tracks returned, threading itself through the memory like a reminder. I understood then, without fear, without surprise, that this place was not meant to be stayed in. It was meant to be visited. I stood, still holding the box, the tree, the lights, the square. Everything remained calm, unchanged. There was no rush, no sense of loss, only quiet acknowledgement, as if the memory itself were saying goodbye. The door appeared behind me, the same dark wood, the same simple handle. I turned toward it, the sound of the train growing stronger with each step. Just before I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. The square was still there, waiting. I opened the door. Warm lights surrounded me again, and then I was back on the train. The door closed softly behind me. The rhythm of the wheels settled into its steady pace. I looked down. My hands were empty, and yet I carried something with me, something I hadn't realized I had lost. For a while, I remained standing where I was. The train continued its slow movement, the familiar rhythm settling back into my body. The warmth returned, steady and reassuring, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And yet, everything felt slightly different. I became aware of myself again, of my hands, my breath, the quiet space around me. The memory I had just left lingered like the after-image of light when you close your eyes. I looked around the carriage. The passengers were still there, seated in their places. But something had shifted, or perhaps it was simply that I was noticing them more closely now. The woman by the window had turned a page in her book, though I still couldn't see any words on it. The older man held his ticket loosely, studying it as if it might change if he waited long enough. The younger child swung his feet gently, his gaze unfocused, peaceful. No one looked surprised to see me return. It felt as though this was expected. I began to walk again slowly, allowing the train to guide my pace. The lamps overhead cast long, gentle shadows that moved almost imperceptibly with the motion of the carriage. As I passed another door, I felt nothing, no pull, no recognition. I continued. Then further down I stopped. This door felt different from the first one. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cold, it felt distant, like something seen through glass. I stood in front of it for a long time, listening to the sound of the train. I noticed how steady it was, how unchanged, as if time itself were adjusting to the train rather than the other way around. I placed my hand on the handle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a quiet thought surfaced in my mind, not in words, but in feeling. You don't have to. I realized then that this door was not about memory. It was about possibility. Slowly, I turned the handle. The door opened. The light beyond it was cooler this time, pale, subtle, like early morning before the sun fully rises. I stepped through. I stood in a long hallway. The walls were simple, painted in soft, neutral tones. The floor beneath my feet was smooth and polished, reflecting the overhead lights faintly. Large windows lined one side of the hall, revealing a city beyond. Not the city I knew, but one I recognized. It was taller, quieter, covered in the muted colors of early winter. Snow fell lightly between buildings, catching the light in slow, graceful patterns. I moved toward the windows. Down below, people walked along wide streets, wrapped in coats and scarves. Cars passed quietly. Everything felt calm, organized, purposeful. I felt older here, not physically, but inwardly. This place carried the weight of responsibility, of decisions made and not made, of routines settled into. A door opened somewhere behind me. I turned. A classroom, rows of desks, a chalkboard at the front. books stacked neatly on a desk near the window. I stepped inside. The room was empty, yet it felt recently used. The air carried the faint scent of paper and dust. On the chalkboard, words had been written and partially erased, leaving pale traces behind. I moved closer. Some of the words were still legible. Dates, notes, fragments of ideas. I didn't understand everything I saw, but I felt a strange familiarity. The sense of being somewhere I had not yet been, but would be. I noticed a notebook lying open on one of the desks. Its pages were filled with handwriting, my handwriting. I recognized it immediately, not as it was then, but as it would become, more deliberate, more controlled, less uncertain. I turned a page. There were notes about subjects I hadn't studied yet, thoughts I hadn't thought yet, questions I hadn't learned how to ask. And then I saw something else. Between the lines, written smaller, almost hidden, was a single sentence. "You're still thinking about the train." My breath caught. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. The sounds of the city outside had softened, as if someone had closed a door on them. I felt a presence then, not a figure, not a voice, just awareness. I realized that this place was not showing me a fixed future. It was showing me a direction, a possibility shaped by choices I hadn't made yet. The hallway outside blurred slightly, the edges of the world softening, and once again, faintly at first, I heard the train. The sound threaded its way through the room, steady and patient, reminding me that this place, too, was temporary. I closed the notebook. As I did, the classroom faded gently, dissolving into light and shadow. The door appeared. I didn't hesitate this time. I stepped through. The warmth of the carriage returned immediately. The train continued its quiet journey. I felt changed, not shaken, not frightened, just aware, as if I had glimpsed something not meant to guide me, but to remind me that paths exist long before we choose to walk them. I looked down the carriage once more. There were many doors still ahead, some warm, some distant, some quiet in ways I didn't yet understand. And I knew with calm certainty that this journey was far from over. After returning from the second door, I did not move right away. I stood still, allowing the sensation of the train to settle once more. The warmth, the steady rhythm, the gentle sway beneath my feet. All of it felt familiar now, almost comforting. I was no longer surprised by where I was. Instead, I felt attentive, as though the train were slowly teaching me how to listen. I noticed that the carriage seemed longer than before, or perhaps it was simply unfolding itself gradually, revealing more space the farther I walked. The lamps glowed softly overhead, their light forming small islands of warmth along the corridor. Shadows stretched gently between them, never sharp, never threatening. I began to walk. This time, I did not hurry. I let my steps fall in time with the movement of the train, matching its pace without thinking. As I passed the seats, I became aware of the passengers more clearly than before. They were not all children. Some were older, much older, their faces lined with years, their posture relaxed in a way that suggested acceptance rather than fatigue. Others looked young, but not in the way I was young. Their youth felt quieter, more internal. A woman sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes closed, as if resting. A man across from her stared out the window, his reflection merging with the dark outside. None of them spoke. Yet I felt that each carried a story. A door ahead caught my attention. Unlike the others, This one did not pull me forward with curiosity or recognition. Instead, it felt neutral, almost anonymous. I stopped in front of it. For a moment, I hesitated. "What's behind this one?" I asked quietly, not knowing who I was speaking to. The train answered with its rhythm. I placed my hand on the handle and turned it. The light beyond the door was dimmer than before. I stepped into a small room, not a place, but a moment. I stood in a kitchen, softly lit by a single overhead lamp. Outside the window, snow fell steadily. A table sat in the center of the room, set simply for two. An older couple sat across from each other. They were not speaking, but the silence between them was not empty. It was full of shared years, of familiar routines, of words no longer needing to be said. One of them reached across the table and adjusted the other's sleeve gently. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. I felt like a guest here, not meant to interrupt. The scene shifted. Now I stood in a hospital hallway, clean, quiet, softly lit. A man sat alone on a bench, his hands clasped tightly together. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something heavy, hope, fear, waiting. The moment lingered, then faded. Another scene emerged. A young woman stood at a train station, not this one, but another. She held a single suitcase. Snow fell lightly around her as she took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something new. She looked both frightened and excited. I felt a strange pull then, not toward the scene itself, but toward the understanding behind it. These were not my memories. They were moments, lives unfolding, choices being made, losses being carried quietly. The room shifted again and again, each time revealing a different fragment of existence. A child learning to ride a bicycle. A man standing alone in an empty apartment for the first time. A woman opening a letter she had waited years to receive. None of these moments were dramatic. None were loud. They were gentle, ordinary, deeply human. I realized then what this carriage was. It was not about my past or my future. It was about life itself, seen not as a story, but as a collection of small, meaningful moments. The sound of the train grew louder. I felt the familiar pull, the gentle signal that it was time to return. The door appeared. As I stepped back through it, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet understanding that I was not alone in my confusion, my longing, my questions. Back in the carriage, I noticed something else. Some of the passengers were gone. The seats they had occupied were now empty, still warm, as if they had only just left. Others remained. A new passenger sat near the window, someone I hadn't seen before. He looked calm, content, as if he had just arrived somewhere he needed to be. I wondered then how long people stayed on this train, and what it meant to leave. I walked farther down the carriage. More doors awaited. Some felt heavy, some light, some so quiet I almost passed them without noticing. I understood now that this journey was not about seeing everything. It was about seeing enough. The train continued forward, steady and patient, and I continued with it. I noticed it only because I almost passed it. The door blended into the wall of the carriage so perfectly that it didn't immediately register as something separate. The wood was the same shade, the surface just as smooth, and yet something about it felt absent. I stepped closer. There was no handle, no lock, no keyhole, no marking of any kind, just a door. At first I assumed it was decorative, or perhaps not a door at all, but a panel meant to conceal something practical, storage, equipment, something ordinary. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt it. A quiet pull, not curiosity, not urgency, recognition. I rested my hand against the surface. It was cool to the touch, unlike the warmth of the other doors. But it wasn't cold in an unpleasant way. It felt distant, like touching stone that had been shaded for a long time. I listened. The train's rhythm continued unchanged. The lamps overhead glowed steadily. Nothing else in the carriage seemed to react to my presence here. No one watched me. No one stopped me. I became aware of my breathing, slow, even. I realized then that this door was not meant to be opened in the usual way. It wasn't asking for action. It was asking for stillness. I closed my eyes. At first, there was nothing, just darkness behind my eyelids, the gentle sway of the train, the familiar sound of the rails. Then, gradually, something shifted. Not outside, inside. I felt the sensation of standing still while something else moved around me, like being in the center of a slow current, untouched by its pull. Images began to surface, not scenes, not memories, impressions, a sense of waiting, of time stretching without direction, of moments passing without being counted. I thought of all the times in my life when I had waited without knowing what for. Long afternoons, quiet evenings, the spaces between important events. The door seemed to respond, not by opening, but by softening. I opened my eyes. The surface of the door no longer looked solid. The wood had become faintly translucent, as if light were filtering through from the other side. I could not see shapes, only depth. I stepped closer. The moment my forehead rested gently against the door, the world shifted. There was no sudden change, no bright light, no movement. I stood in a wide, open space that felt both vast and close at the same time. There were no walls, no floor, no sky, just a soft, even glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I felt weightless, not floating, just unburdened. Thoughts came more slowly here. When they arrived, they did not stay long. I realized that this place was not showing me anything. It was allowing me to be. I became aware of myself in a different way, not as a child, not as an adult, but as something quieter, something beneath names and ages and roles. Time felt irrelevant. Minutes could have passed, or hours, or none at all. The train sound was gone now, and yet I knew it was still moving. Somewhere beyond this place, I sensed other presences, not near, not far, just present. They did not look at me. They did not speak. They did not judge. They existed alongside me, sharing the same stillness. I felt calm, not happy, not sad, balanced. Gradually, I became aware of a faint sound returning. The train, soft at first, then clearer. The glow around me dimmed slightly, not disappearing, but receding. I understood without being told that this place was not meant for long stays. It was not an escape. It was a pause, a reminder that stillness exists beneath everything. I took a slow breath, and another. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the carriage. The door without a handle was solid again, unchanged, as if nothing had happened, and yet something had. I felt lighter, not in body, but in being. I stepped away from the door and continued down the carriage. The train carried on, steady and patient, and I knew that from this point on, every door would feel different. I felt the change before the train slowed. It was subtle, a shift in the air, a deepening of the rhythm beneath my feet. The steady motion I had grown used to began to stretch, as if the train itself were taking a longer breath. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside the windows, the darkness began to thin, not into light, but into something softer. Fog, thick and slow-moving, It pressed gently against the glass, blurring the outlines of what lay beyond. Shapes appeared and disappeared without fully forming. The train decelerated quietly. No announcement was made, no voice called out. And yet, I knew. We were approaching a stop. A platform emerged from the fog. It was narrow, barely more than a strip of stone running parallel to the tracks. Old lamps stood at regular intervals, their light warm and dim, creating small pools of visibility that did not quite reach each other. There was no sign, no name, no indication of where this place was or when. The train came to rest with a soft sigh. The doors opened. Cold air slipped inside, carrying the scent of snow and something older, wood, iron, earth. Some of the passengers stood, not all at once, one by one. They moved calmly, without hesitation or urgency, as if they had been expecting this moment for a long time. A man near the window rose, adjusting his coat. A woman gathered her scarf slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. No one looked afraid, no one looked surprised. They walked toward the open doors and stepped onto the platform, disappearing into the fog almost immediately. I stayed where I was. My feet felt heavy, not from fear, but from uncertainty. I watched as the seats they left behind became empty, still warm, still holding the shape of those who had occupied them. I wondered what it meant to step off here. Was this a destination, an ending, or simply another door, disguised as a place? The fog outside shifted, revealing brief glimpses of something beyond the lamps. Trees, perhaps, or buildings, or nothing at all. It was impossible to tell. I stood and approached the open door, stopping just short of the threshold. The cold pressed against my skin, sharper now. I felt the pull, not strong, not insistent, just present, as if the stop were saying, "You may." I looked back into the carriage. The remaining passengers sat quietly, waiting. None of them watched me. None urged me forward or held me back. The train itself seemed patient. I took one step closer. The platform did not look hostile. It looked quiet, peaceful, in a way that felt final. I imagined myself stepping out, walking into the fog, becoming one of the shapes that faded from view. Would I remember the train? Would I remember anything at all? Or would this place become a new beginning, disconnected from what came before? I thought of home, of the argument, of the cold streets I had wandered through before reaching the station, of how small and lost I had felt. And then I thought of something else, not a place, a feeling, the sense that my journey was not finished, not yet. The fog stirred, the lamps flickered softly, the train waited. I stepped back. The doors closed without a sound. The train began to move again, slowly at first, then with familiar steadiness. Outside, the platform slipped away, swallowed by the fog. I watched until there was nothing left to see. As I returned to my seat, I noticed something new. A small object lay on the empty seat across from me. It hadn't been there before. A ticket, worn at the edges, blank. No destination, no time, just a simple piece of paper, heavy with meaning. I picked it up, and as I did, I felt certain of one thing. The stop without a name had not been left behind. It was now part of the journey. I did not understand the meaning of the ticket at first. It was small, almost fragile, its edges softened by time or handling. The paper felt thicker than it should have been, warmer than the air around it. Blank. No name, no date, no destination. I turned it over in my hands, expecting something to appear. Letters forming slowly, symbols revealing themselves. Nothing happened. The train continued its steady movement, the rhythm beneath me calm and familiar. The lights glowed gently overhead. Outside, darkness had returned, uninterrupted and deep. I slipped the ticket into my pocket. I did not know why. It simply felt important. The journey continued, but my thoughts began to drift. Not forward, backward. Years later, I would find that ticket again, not in a dream, not in memory, but in real life. I was no longer a child then. I was a student living in a small rented room near the university. The walls were thin, the furniture mismatched, the nights often quiet in a way that made thoughts louder. One evening, while searching for a notebook, I opened an old box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were small remnants of childhood, a broken watch, a faded photograph, a marble, things that had survived moves and time without purpose. At the bottom of the box lay the ticket, unchanged, still blank. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding it, my heart beating faster than I expected. I tried to remember where it had come from. The memory was hazy, distant, like recalling a place you are no longer sure you've been to. A train, fog, warm light. I told myself it must have been something I picked up as a child. A souvenir, a mistake. And yet, the feeling returned. Recognition. I placed the ticket on my desk and left it there. Over the following weeks, I noticed small things, strange coincidences, moments that felt aligned in ways I couldn't explain. I would miss one train, only to meet someone on the next who would change the course of my studies. I would choose one class over another without knowing why, only to find myself drawn deeper into subjects that felt familiar, as if I had seen them before. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake with the sound of distant rails in my ears. Not loud, just present. The ticket remained on my desk, always blank. During my second year at the university, I began receiving letters. They arrived irregularly, without return addresses. The envelopes were plain, the handwriting careful and deliberate. Inside, the letters contained no instructions, no warnings, just observations, reflections, thoughts written as if by someone who knew me well. Better than anyone should, they spoke of patience, of waiting without fear, of understanding that some journeys do not reveal their purpose until much later. I never showed the letters to anyone. I did not know how to explain them. One night, after reading one of these letters, I noticed the ticket had moved. It now rested beside the envelope, though I was certain I had left it elsewhere. A faint mark had appeared on its surface. Not words, not symbols, just a line, thin and pale, like the beginning of a path. I felt then that the train was not gone. It was simply distant, waiting. Years passed. Life unfolded in expected and unexpected ways. I graduated. I moved cities. I worked. I met people who stayed for a while and others who passed through quietly. The ticket followed me, always blank, always present. Sometimes it appeared in places I did not remember placing it, on a bookshelf, inside a coat pocket, between the pages of a book. Each time, it brought with it the same feeling, that the journey was ongoing, that I was not lost, only traveling. I stopped trying to understand it. Some things I learned are not meant to be explained. They are meant to be carried. I had begun to think that the doors would stop appearing after the stop without a name, after the ticket that followed me into my adult life. The carriage had grown quieter, longer, almost endless. The lamps overhead glowed steadily, and the windows showed only darkness, as if the train were moving through space rather than land. Then I saw it. A door that did not look like the others. Its surface was lighter, almost pale, and faint markings covered it. Shapes that reminded me of drawings made without thinking. Lines curved into forms that almost made sense, then drifted away again. Stars, ladders, waves, things without names. I stopped in front of it. Something tightened gently in my chest. Not fear, longing. I reached out and touched the door. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting. The handle turned easily. Light spilled out as I stepped through. Not bright light, soft light, the kind that exists in dreams just before waking. I found myself standing on a wide field of pale grass that moved as if stirred by an unseen breeze. Above me, the sky stretched endlessly. Not blue, not dark, but layered with slow-moving clouds and shades of silver and gold. There was no sun, yet everything was illuminated. In the distance, I saw enormous books standing upright like buildings. Their pages turned slowly on their own, releasing faint sounds, whispers, laughter, half-remembered thoughts. I walked forward. Each step felt lighter than the last. Ahead, a staircase rose into the sky. It had no visible end, disappearing into the clouds above. Children climbed it calmly, one step at a time, their movements unhurried. Some carried paper airplanes. Others held nothing at all. None of them spoke. I noticed that none of them looked afraid. To my left, a river flowed upward instead of down, its surface reflecting scenes that shifted constantly. A bedroom lit by a nightlight, a school hallway, a snowy street at night. I recognized some of them. They were mine. Others were not. A boy stood near the river, launching paper boats into the current. Each boat carried a single word written in careful handwriting. Hope, adventure, home. The boats drifted upward and vanished into the clouds. I felt something loosen inside me, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I walked farther. The ground changed beneath my feet, becoming soft like pages of a book. Words appeared briefly, then faded before I could read them. Stories unfinished, ideas never spoken aloud, dreams set aside but not forgotten. I came upon a small table standing alone in the open field. On it lay crayons, colored pencils, and blank sheets of paper. A child sat there drawing slowly. I did not see his face, but I knew who he was. He did not look up. He did not need to. I watched as he drew a train, not detailed, just a simple shape, with smoke curling upward into the sky. I realized then that this world was not a place. It was a space where imagination lived before it learned limits, where ideas existed without needing permission, where wonder did not yet require explanation. I felt the pull again, gentle, insistent. The air around me began to shift, the light growing softer, the colors slowly fading into something quieter. I knew I could not stay, not because I wasn't allowed, but because staying would mean forgetting how to leave. I took one last look around. The children continued climbing the staircase. The books turned their pages. The river flowed upward, carrying its small boats of words at the sky. I stepped back through the door. The carriage welcomed me with familiar warmth. The door closed silently behind me. For a long moment, I did not move. I felt older, not in years, but in understanding. I knew then that imagination does not disappear. It waits, patient, for moments of stillness, for quiet nights, for trains that appear through fog. The train moved on, and I moved with it. The door appeared quietly. I almost missed it, distracted by my thoughts after leaving the world of imagination. The carriage felt longer now, the distance between the lamps stretching in a way that made it difficult to judge how far I had walked. This door was darker than the others, plain, unmarked. It did not pull at me with emotion or memory. It simply waited. I opened it. I stepped into silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that exists when nothing expects you. I stood on a street I recognized, or thought I did. The buildings were familiar in shape and size, yet something was wrong. Windows reflected light, but no movement stirred behind them. Doors were closed, yet untouched by age or neglect. Everything looked paused. The sky above was pale, almost colorless, as if time had stopped deciding what it should be. I began to walk. My footsteps echoed softly, though the street was wide and open. There were no cars, no voices, no signs of life. Yet the world did not feel abandoned. It felt complete, as if it had never needed people to exist. I passed a cafe. Tables were set neatly inside, cups resting exactly where they had been placed. A faint warmth lingered in the air, as though someone had just stepped outside moments before. But no one returned. I walked farther. Parks stretched out with perfectly trimmed grass. Leaves moved gently on trees, stirred by a breeze that seemed to follow no pattern. Clocks hung in shop windows. All of them showed different times. None of them moved. I realized then that this world was not empty because something had gone wrong. It was empty because it had continued on a different path, a version of reality where humanity had never arrived or had quietly stepped aside. I felt no fear, only a deep, settling calm. I stood in the middle of a crosswalk and looked around. The world did not watch me. It did not react. It did not care whether I stayed or left. And somehow, that made it feel honest. I noticed then that some things were subtly different. Buildings curved slightly where they should have been straight. Streets looped back on themselves if followed too long. Reflections in glass lingered half a second longer than they should have. The laws here were similar to mine, but not the same. I walked until I reached a station, not the one I had come from. Another, smaller. Its sign was blank. The tracks ended just beyond the platform, vanishing into grass. I sat on a bench and waited. I did not know what for. Time passed, or perhaps it did not. Eventually, I became aware of a feeling, not loneliness, but understanding. This world did not need stories. It did not need memories. It simply existed. I realized then why the door had brought me here, to show me a place untouched by choice, a world without longing, without regret, without hope, complete but unmoving. The silence deepened. I felt the pull again, gentle, unavoidable. The edges of the world softened, colors fading into pale light. I stood. I did not look back. The door closed behind me as I returned to the train. The warmth returned immediately, the sound, the movement, the presence of others, even in their quiet. I understood something then. It is not people who make the world chaotic. It is people who make it alive. The train continued forward, and I continued with it. There is one part of the story I almost forgot, not because it wasn't important, but because it was gentle. After everything that came before, the doors, the worlds, the quiet movement of the train, there was a moment when the journey simply softened. I remember standing in front of one last door. It did not look unusual, no symbols, no strange markings, just a plain wooden door, slightly worn, familiar in a way I couldn't immediately explain. When I opened it, warmth surrounded me instantly. I was in my room, my childhood room. Everything was exactly as it had been. The small desk near the window, the bookshelf with uneven rows, the chair where I never sat properly. Even the faint glow from the streetlight outside fell across the floor at the same angle I remembered. I stood there quietly, afraid to move, afraid that if I touched anything, it might disappear. On the floor near the door lay a small pile of wrapped gifts, carefully placed, lovingly prepared. I knelt beside them and traced my fingers along the edges of the paper. The tags bore my name, written in my mother's handwriting. I felt a tightness in my chest then, not sadness, relief. I sat on my bed. The blankets were warm, as if someone had just smoothed them out. The familiar weight of them settled over me, grounding me in a way the train never had. For a moment, I simply looked around. The posters on the wall, the small cracks in the ceiling, the quiet hum of the house at night. I realized then that I was home. I lay down. I do not remember falling asleep, only the feeling of safety. Morning came gently. Light filtered through the curtains, softer than usual. I heard movement in the house, footsteps, the distant sound of dishes, quiet voices. I sat up slowly. Everything was still there. When I stepped into the hallway, my parents were already awake. They turned. Their faces changed instantly. Relief, joy, something close to disbelief. My mother crossed the room and pulled me into an embrace so tight it felt like she was making sure I was real. My father's hand rested on my shoulder, firm and steady. No one asked questions, not then. It was Christmas morning. The tree stood in the corner of the room, lights glowing softly, even in daylight. The air smelled of pine and something warm from the kitchen. I sat on the floor and opened the gifts slowly, savoring each moment. I did not tell them where I had been. I did not know how, and somehow they did not ask. Years later, I would wonder if that night truly happened, if the train had been real, or if it had been a dream created by a tired, frightened child. But then I remembered the ticket, and the letters, and the sound of rails I still hear sometimes late at night. And I understand. Some journeys do not take us away from home. They bring us back. The letter arrived on Christmas Eve. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet winter hour when daylight fades slowly and the world seems to pause between day and night. Snow fell outside my window in soft, unhurried patterns, and the city sounded distant, muted by the cold. I almost missed it. It lay among ordinary mail, advertisements, notices, envelopes without meaning. But this one felt different the moment I picked it up. The paper was thicker, the envelope unmarked, no return address. My name was written carefully in a handwriting I did not recognize, and yet something about it felt familiar. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment, the faint sound of distant traffic, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, just words. Some journeys do not end when we leave the train. Some continue quietly alongside our lives. You have been traveling longer than you think. I sat down slowly. The words settled into the room, into the silence, into me. The letter went on, written in the same steady hand. It spoke of winter nights and forgotten stations, of moments when the world feels thin, as if something might pass through if we only listened closely enough. It spoke of choices, small ones, barely noticed at the time, that quietly shape entire lives. And then it mentioned the ticket, not directly, but clearly. You will know when it begins to change, the letter said. Do not be afraid when it does. My hand tightened around the paper. The ticket. I stood and crossed the room to my desk. It lay where it always did, but it was no longer blank. A faint word had appeared, so light it was almost part of the paper itself. Soon, I felt a strange mixture of calm and recognition, as if something long expected had finally remembered me. That night, as snow continued to fall, I dreamed of the train, not the way I had before. This time, I did not stand on a platform. I watched from a distance. The train moved slowly through a snowy landscape, its windows glowing warmly against the dark. I could see silhouettes inside, passengers sitting quietly, waiting, listening. The train did not stop. It passed through the night like a thought drifting through the mind just before sleep. When I woke, the sound of distant rails still echoed faintly in my ears. Days passed, then weeks. Life continued, but something had shifted. I noticed moments more clearly, paid attention to small details I once overlooked. The way light moved across walls, the pause before someone spoke, the feeling of standing still while everything else moved forward. Sometimes late at night, I would take the ticket from my pocket and study it. The word remained. Soon. It did not change. It did not hurry. And somehow, that made me feel patient too. On another evening, just before Christmas ended, another letter arrived. This one was shorter. Some trains returned. Some only passed once. Listen carefully. That night, I stood by my window and watched the snow fall. And for the first time in years, I felt certain of something. The journey was not over. It was simply waiting for the right moment to continue. I do not hear the train as often now. Life has grown louder over the years, filled with responsibilities, routines, and days that move quickly, one into another. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments, it returns, late at night, when the world slows, when thoughts drift without direction. I hear it faintly, not outside, inside, a distant rhythm, steady and calm, like a heartbeat beneath everything else. I no longer try to follow it. I no longer search for stations hidden in fog or doors without handles. I understand now that the train does not arrive to take us away. It arrives to remind us of stillness, of patience, of the parts of ourselves that remain untouched by time. Sometimes, on winter evenings, I sit quietly and watch the light shift across the room. Snow may fall outside, or rain tap softly against the glass. The world feels distant, gentle, and in those moments, I feel it again. The warmth of the carriage, the quiet presence of other travelers, the sense that I am not alone on this path. The ticket still appears from time to time. It remains mostly blank, and that is enough. I have learned that not all destinations need to be written down. Some are felt, some are lived, some exist only in the spaces between memory and imagination. The forest of thoughts grows quiet. The doors rest. The train continues its journey somewhere beyond sight, carrying stories, dreams, and moments of reflection through the night. And here, where I am now, there is calm, there is warmth, there is rest. If you listen closely, you might hear it too, the soft sound of rails in the distance, steady and patient, guiding nothing, promising nothing, simply moving on. You do not need to follow. You only need to rest.